Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is PK Agarwal, CEO and Regional Dean at Northeastern University, Silicon Valley. PK has been Chief Technology Officer for the state of California, CEO of TIE Global, and Chairman of the Board at Future 500. At Northeastern, PK is leading the charge for education relating to the Internet of Things. Welcome, PK.
Thank you, Chuck. Good to be here.
So I wonder if we could start by how did you end up at the university? You've had a lot of significant positions along the way.
Chuck, first of all, I'm a techie. I come from a tech background, and when Northeastern was planning on launching their regional campus here, they wanted somebody who's the intersection of technology and startups. And as TIE Global, I was the CEO of the institution that's the largest network of entrepreneurs. So I had been around startups for 5-6 years. And at the same time, the biggest, so from a standpoint of demand-supply gap in Silicon Valley is in the tech sector. So it was an intersection of those two areas that kind of made Northeastern and I click.
So what have you found in terms of the state of education today, especially as it relates to essentially the future?
Chuck, the interesting part is that given the speed at which disruption and adoption of technology is moving, the STEM demand supply will continue to grow. And obviously there are pockets where it doesn't necessarily work exactly right. But in general, if you look at anybody's figure, all the research firms like McKinsey and Gartner, and look at federal government, which is generally tends to be a little more conservative, they're all predicting that through 2025, the supply and the demand gap are basically the supply outstripping, let me get this right, you know what I mean, the demand is going to exceed supply, to the tune of 1.25 million professionals. So that's really the sort of the big aha moment in this thing that it's going to be a seller's market for a long time to come.
So why Silicon Valley? And why Northeastern there? Northeastern obviously has a monstrous campus in Boston.
Yeah. So Northeastern's future vision is to leverage an experiential model and basically have a global network of campuses, a global university system. So in that regard, we have a campus in Charlotte, North Carolina. The second one was in Seattle, which is doing exceptionally well. Third was in Silicon Valley. And we recently launched one in Toronto, and we're looking for the fifth one. And the idea is to build a global university system. And as a nonprofit, fundamentally, we are here to serve each one of our local campuses, regional campuses, to serve the local community and contribute to the economic vitality. So in that regard, Silicon Valley being all things tech made perfect sense to be here. And also it kind of balances our East Coast presence with a strong West Coast presence.
So regarding the future and the Internet of Things and so forth, what do you see the state of knowledge in education today in terms of what people know and what they need to know?
Here lies the challenge, is that IoT lives at the intersection of 5 or 6 different disciplines. Many of them are in engineering, like, for instance, sensors, integrated circuits, all of the things that come around hardware engineering. And on the other hand, you got computer science, which is telecommunications, predictive analytics in general, data communication, all these new words that are floating around, edge computing, fog computing, or essentially being that sensor is the point of origin for all of this information, or data, I should say. And then slowly it comes, moves along the stack, and then it turns into information, and eventually turns into some business intelligence or personal intelligence. So essentially, almost everybody who's in this area right now comes either from the engineering discipline, and they know very little about computer science piece of it, and they think that's secondary to the whole scheme of things. And many people who come from the top end of the stack, which is from the computer science side of things, they don't understand anything about hardware, and they think that's just irrelevant. It's just hardware as a commodity. And I think both points of view are somewhat, they're missing the point. So essentially, from a skill set standpoint, our view is that we need to take people from both those disciplines and give them the other half, or actually it's going to turn out to be for each one of them is the 60%, not the other half, because the gaps are pretty significant. And then you have the IoT workforce. And then you add on top of it issues of design, because now you're no longer in just pure software domain. You're in a hardware software domain. And so the issues of design are going to become pretty paramount, especially as these things are going to touch, whether it's in the industrial IoT context or health services. I mean, they're going to touch everybody. So the need for elegant design becomes very relevant. And from a number standpoint, just to add to the mix, is that I was just recently looking at a couple of year-old McKinsey, which is still somewhat dated and conservative, but they're talking about economic opportunity for $11.1 trillion by 2025. And our informal estimates are that this industry is going to take upwards of 200,000 professionals in the next 3 years. And I'm still sort of a little bit mind-boggling, but I don't know where they're going to come from.
So how do you possibly get as an education institution, how do you get your arms around all of that?
So the way we have started to do this is that we have launched a program last fall here in Silicon Valley. Basically, it's an upskilling program for computer scientists and engineers. Over a 16-week period, we are skilling them to become a full-scale IoT professional. And it's working very well, but it's really a drop in the bucket, quite frankly. And then plus, we're going to try to replicate this in other parts of the country. What makes this a little bit harder, when you have, typically we're getting so used to online, everything online. And that's true to a large extent, a portion of our program is online also. But our belief is, and this is consistent with Northeastern's philosophy of everything experiential, you cannot learn IoT unless you get your hands dirty. So which means you need a lab. And especially if you're going to deal with the industrial IoT, you need an enterprise-grade lab, which gets to be pretty expensive. For at the low end of the spectrum, you can certainly take Arduino boards and those kind of things and get a little bit of experience. So so it's a challenge, but we are taking one baby step and hopefully continue to grow.
So in terms of the training or the teaching, I should say, of these people, are you actually getting using teachers that you had and they basically relearn some new things, or are you having to find a new source of teachers who can teach this advanced stuff?
So in Silicon Valley, we're using industry practitioners because there's clearly a lot of shortage of even people who are capable of teaching these things. So we obviously tapped a lot of industry professionals to provide the lab training and other kinds of training. Also in Boston campus, we have some very pioneering faculty members who are starting to get into these areas. We are working towards the idea that many of our master's engineering programs would offer IoT as a concentration. So we're starting to make our inroads into this in a variety of ways. And I'm pretty confident that within 2 to 3 years, there's going to be multiple universities going to be offering some form of credential, probably a degree credential, maybe even undergrad. I know I've started to see some of those conversations start in our university and elsewhere as well.
So from an education standpoint, do you see IoT overall as almost like the medical profession where someone becomes a practitioner, but then they become a specialist?
So specialized, this is true for all things tech really anyway, that you have to understand your industry vertical. And within vertical, I mean, if you look at technology, IT in general, I mean, these days, once you become a banking IT professional or insurance IT professional or public sector or, you name it, I mean, it's just all over the map. I mean, you tend to specialize. Same thing you're starting to see in IoT. Obviously, the biggest and the lowest hanging fruit in the IoT business is industrial IoT. And I think half, at least in terms of tangible economic value, is going to come from that sector. And within that, clearly, oil and gas industries, very up on the scale. Certainly, manufacturing operations are way up there. So again, I'm starting to see these specialties emerge. In fact, we recently did a very interesting applied research project with Weatherford, Houston-based oil and gas services company. And again, they were saying the sensors have been around for forever, but they use less than 1% of the information that comes out of these sensors. And now they want to use this to optimize the oil fields. And if you can get the 10, 15, 20% more output for the same dollar, I mean, again, that's a tangible value. So that's one vertical, basically, that the whole industrial IoT. The second one is this, what generally labeled as smart cities, which is primarily an infrastructure play, whether it's the smart waterways or electrical systems or smart sewer systems or transportation. And that's the whole specialty of its own. We really need to understand public infrastructure very well. And the third is sort of generally lumped into the consumer marketplace, or maybe within that, you can call it the healthcare being another one. So yes, there's many subword. I guess your example of medicine is a good one, that eventually you need to know your specialization, both from a trade standpoint. In this particular case, probably maybe a little different spin would be that you need to know the business domain that you're operating in.
And what are you saying today is the state of the market from the basically the students? Are they coming in one way and going out another? Are they more savvy today than they were 5 or 10 years ago?
Oh, clearly, yeah. I mean, I have seen even in my last 2.5 years with Northeastern, and I've been around education in one shape or form as an adjunct faculty and all that. They are, especially Northeastern students. I mean, you have to, you're yourself an alum, so you know what I'm talking about. But basically, the hands-on component and the experiential component of the education, I'm finding more and more students generally across the board from better institutions are coming into the workforce so much smarter and so much kind of hit the ground running.
And you think that's happening everywhere besides Northeastern?
It's not happening everywhere. I mean, we certainly take a great pride in at Northeastern and making things experiential. But I would say more and more institutions are recognizing the fact that the traditional models of pedagogy are no longer relevant to today's world, where and it's all driven by speed. I mean, everything is going to happen now, and if it needs to be done, let's do it. And consequently, you don't have these long lead times where you take people with theoretical knowledge and take for 6 months to a year to try to, but it's a general trend. I would say the better institutions, the top 10% are definitely, sticking to this philosophy of that you need to create professionals for the industry.
So can you talk a bit about entrepreneurship? I know that's one of your keys. Are students coming in looking to become independent entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs inside big organizations? What do you see as any patterns, if there are any?
So IoT clearly. Let me just talk about IoT first. Or perhaps let me back up. In general, there's a clear recognition, especially given my public sector background, where I do work with a lot of policymakers, and a lot of these people come to Silicon Valley to understand the innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a clear recognition across the globe at this point that the Fortune 1000, in the U.S. context or in other companies, the major corporations, are not going to be the ones who are going to create enough jobs to really sort of employ the people that are coming into the workforce, especially when you move into the developing countries, my home country like India, where you have million new people coming into the workforce every month. I mean, it's a daunting challenge. So from that standpoint alone, there's a huge recognition that entrepreneurship is going to be a way of life for a lot of people. So consequently, you can see that the public sector support, governmental support, organizations like United Nations. Just recently, there was a global entrepreneurship summit that happens once a year. It was last year. It was in Silicon Valley. The recognition that you need to nurture more entrepreneurs, and also when you look from a standpoint that given the rate of change and disruption is creating a lot of new opportunities. So it's perfect timing. I mean, on one hand, you have a lot of opportunities, and so we can nurture a lot of entrepreneurs. That sort of is a good fit. So having said that, in the IoT context, we are seeing really sort of two distinct camps. of people who are coming to us. People who are coming to us and saying, I've been in the workforce for 20, 25 years, and I see this sort of a golden road out there around IoT. And so they are the ones who are going more into the corporate innovation and that sort of a line of challenge. But the other, roughly, I would say, 30% of the people we are seeing coming into this are clearly saying, you know what? I mean, it's just a greenfield out there. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to understand this better so I can create new products, new services. So that's kind of the mix we are seeing.
So is that basically someone coming in saying, I want to learn this because I'm going to go be an innovator at General Motors, and then there's someone saying I want to learn this because I'm going to go become an innovator and a part at Google or Amazon.
Yes, yeah. And the third group, which is that I'm going to go on my own because they have these product ideas, and we are seeing some really interesting stuff. Because again, back to what I keep talking about, experiential. We want them to within the program, if they're working for a company, for their own company, or if they're not working for a company, then create some new products. And by the way, Chuck, the kind of products I'm seeing are just all over the map. I mean, some of this stuff completely blows my mind in the sense that it makes me realize that this is not just value creation and return on investment and new ideas and predictive maintenance, all the stuff that we around IoT we talk about. But I think we're going to see a whole new culture that's going to evolve around IoT. I mean, I'll give you an example that last year in Consumer Electronics Show, somebody came up with this smart toothbrush. In itself, it just seems kind of, at first blush, it seems kind of silly that why would you have a smart toothbrush? But I can visualize after having, delved deep into it and kind of, share this with other people is that, hey, if you got young kids or even if you're adult, it keeps track of did you brush your teeth? Did you brush? How many times did you brush? How long did you brush? Did you brush it the right way? So you can see that eventually all these things are going to kind of work into our culture. We won't think of these as IoT. These are just new devices that spew out a lot of information that creates value. Anyway, just on a side, I kind of want to share with you that there's a culture shift happening alongside.
Yeah, that's a very big deal because a child, as you're pointing out, a child may grow up with a smart toothbrush and not give it a thought, where an adult would say a smart toothbrush is a crazy idea.
Exactly. And even I'll give you another example. 2 years ago in Consumer Electronics Show, there was a smart baby pacifier. It keeps track of the baby's temperature and moisture content on a real-time basis. And for Generation Z, I mean, this sounds perfectly normal. I mean, you're just constant, ferocious appetite for information, and it seems pretty normal. But for us adults, or baby boomers here, it seemed like a crazy idea.
So what do you see coming in the area of disruption? I mean, it's a whole disruptive world right now. What do you see down the road?
So generally, from a broad, obviously, I mean, disruption is such a large topic, so I'll stick to a little bit to IoT. But obviously, IoT itself is going to be such a massive producer of data that is speeding up machine learning and subsequently AI, following that chain. Because, literally the rate of information creation through IoT devices is accelerating at a pace where they're talking about reaching a point where it's going to be, doubling every 2 months or something of that kind. And obviously, we don't have enough storage around anywhere to do that. So again, this is where the idea of edge computing, and we're going to go back to actually, technically speaking, back to sort of a client-server model. Thanks to internet, we had moved away from this client-server idea. Of course, client-server is rearing its head in the form of edge computing and those kind of things. So that's the kind of a shift that's starting to take place in terms of how this technology kind of plays out. But it's eventually it feeds the AI and machine learning engine.
So what do you see from a societal standpoint of as an example, autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars, where people say I can hardly wait so I don't have to drive, and there are other people who say I will never be in a car that I don't drive.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel to this from the Industrial Revolution. 30% of the people according to historians, said that you're going to have to bury me with my horse.
Right, that's right.
And in some ways, history repeats itself. And I mean, I have a couple of very close friends who are otherwise actually from tech background, and they have the same point of view that I'm not getting the damn machine. I don't trust it. And so it's just this is a disruptive change. With every disruptive change, they say what 10% of the people are sort of heat seekers. They are leading the change, and the middle 50% are kind of saying it looks pretty real, let's do it, and another 10-15% kind of late bloomers. But some 25-30% is going to have to be a generational shift. It's going to just take, and that's why I personally believe that in our times, all tech-driven social change is going to take an entire generation for this to happen. I know that the technology will outpace social change by a factor of 10.
And Silicon Valley is obviously ahead of, I've spent a lot of time out there, so I know that thinking there is not always the same as it is in, say, I don't want to pick a place, but outside of Silicon Valley, because there's so much technology there that's just a part of life. Do people, when they come out of the university, do they just come out so far ahead of everybody? They go back to work somewhere in Middle America, and they have to wait for them to catch up to them?
Yeah, and that's this whole notion that say the Silicon Valley, we live in our own bubble, and we think everybody uses apps all the time, and it's just a way of life. I mean, hey, forget about Middle America. I consider Sacramento my hometown because I spent 20 years of my early parts of my professional life there, and just recently I was back there visiting some of my friends, and I was just talking about that how, as we go to parties, we don't really, drive on any more cars anymore. We just say, hey, this way, it's a risk avoidance thing. Even if you didn't have too much to drink, it's still just a safety thing. And these are all educated people. And one of them said, I've heard about Uber. Tell me what is this thing? So that's an example of 120 miles from Silicon Valley. There's the state capital of California. And educated professionals have never, the idea of using Uber seems like something from the space age.
That's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so forget about, Middle America someplace, or Dorothy there or anything else.
And lastly, where do you see the state of privacy and security going in all of this?
Chuck, I wish I had a good answer to this thing, but this issue is going to become more and more significant. And it's not just even a security layer issue. It is one of the biggest challenges with all IoT systems is that the security is not built in. I mean, historically, or even now, sensors are very small. They have a very small amount of computing capability, but if you don't weave the security systems into the IoT stack, right from the sensor end, all the way up to the privacy part of it, where all the information and business intelligence or personal intelligence is coming out of it. And last couple of years, there's been all these cases about and plus you take devices like they're all sensor driven, like all the listening devices like Alexa and Google Home and all these kind of things. I just think that over the next 10 years, there's going to have to be a lot of policy debate more than anything else. And plus, on the technological side, we're going to have to say, it cannot be that security is a sort of any point in the stack or at the very top when you introduce the idea of security and privacy. It has to start at the sensors. And I think more and more sensor companies I talk to, I'm seeing that they're starting to say that we need an operating system at the sensor level itself. We need encryption capabilities. We need other controls right at the very end, which obviously tends to make, on one hand, you're printing sensors to, have them, 20 for a penny. On the other hand, you're saying we need to create much more intelligence at the sensor level. So overall, my sense is that we're going to see a lot. There's going to be a lot more of these cases which are going to get us to soul search. And there's a lot more technological evolution to, come, and then a lot more regulation and policy debate.
Thank you, PK Agarwal, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.
Thank you, Chuck. Good to be here. Bye-bye.